As we move forward, I'd like to just double down on what Kavita said and welcome our guests, Karl and David. Karl and David will introduce themselves in a second. This is an open conversation, so should you have any questions, please do feel free to ask them to David, Karl, and myself. We'll be very happy to engage during the conversation. This is a fireside chat, so it's not just about us talking, it's also about hearing from you, those of you who are viewing us right now. So David and Karl, please join me in the conversation, and we can begin with a bit of introductions, not only to yourselves, but also to a bit about your companies and also your roles. So the first person who came on camera was David. So David, I'm going to go to you. David, can you just give an insight to your role, what you're doing at DHL, a bit of perspective on DHL, and then we'll move on to Karl in a second. David.
Thanks a lot, Nate. And okay, hi everyone. My name is David. I work for DHL. I had basically the telecoms team, which takes care of networking group-wide within DHL. We also look after the strategy from a network perspective. Obviously, anything to do with security, as network is kind of on the front. I've been with DHL now for over 5.5 years. This is the second time I'm in DHL. And I think over the last year has been quite an interesting time for our group. And I think we came through it really well. So I'm just looking forward to the conversation here and sharing some thoughts with Nathan and Karl. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So Karl, over to you. Please give us an introduction to yourself and the base.
Cheers. Yeah, so I'm Karl Hood, CDIO at Bays, and I'm glad that I didn't have to read out that extraordinarily long job title and organizational name because it is quite long. But we're our central government department, policy department responsible for business, energy, industrial strategy, including things like climate change, supported by 41 partner organizations, which are quite wide and varied. So my role inside Bays is I have overall responsibility for all of our digital data and technology activity. That's both provision of internal services, but also what we do in terms of our interaction with businesses. I also provide a shared service to a couple of other departments, well, one major department, international trade, and the UK Space Agency. And I'm also leading a piece of work looking at cross-government interoperability. So how do we kind of collaborate and work more seamlessly across boundaries in that federated organizational structure?
Fantastic. So I think all of you here will agree we have two very impressive candidates to ask all of your questions to. I don't want to be the one asking the questions. I'm happy to ask them on your behalf, but please do submit your questions in the Q&A box within the Zoom window. All right, so guys, I'm going to start off with a pretty high-level statement because the whole presentation today is really around the idea of what zero trust architecture brings, especially in relation to removing the enterprise attack surface. And I think it's probably worthwhile calling out that enterprise attack surface is coming under more and more focus from, let's just say, bad threat actors, whether it be things like your remote access gateways or even now Microsoft Exchange and all sorts of other platforms that are being attacked by these so-called bad actors. From your point of view, let's, David, I'll come back to you. How do you see that attack surface and that exposure challenging the way in which DHL operates? Because clearly you are a company that has to interact with all types of people, not just business partners, but all the way down to myself when my package gets shipped to the wrong country. Not that it was your fault or anything, but there's a considerate amount of infrastructure you have to take into account. So how do you deal with that whole attack surface? And then we'll spin back into zero trust after that.
Nate. Well, it's a kind of interesting question, honestly. And, okay, I don't think there's any kind of simple answer to that, because I would almost go as far as, rather than kind of securing the attack surface, we're kind of almost expanding it with the way the industries are moving and with more cloud and you have Office 365 and you want to break out and using SD-WAN on a more localized basis. And not wanting to get down to the technicals, but it feels like there's more and more points where that attack surface is kind of increasing and rather than shrinking. And it's not just the enterprise, and you really wouldn't. So I think the focus is really around the data and then the end devices. And I think this is where, and I think the head of this session really kind of makes the name of the session. The zero trust, I think, is one of the features that can kind of attack that. But yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, we're a very large company, and I think we see different issues in different parts of the world. So we're never a single country and territory, which kind of is somewhere around 200 plus all in all. And it all has its own challenges. So it's kind of easy to work in Western Europe versus middle of Africa or some other continent. So it is a challenge, and I think it's more of a journey than a simple answer. And I think if we were a small company, there would be an easy way to do it. Okay, here is a solution, you put it in, and you're kind of done. I think we kind of have a look at the complexities and all of the applications you got, and how does it need to be accessed, the new and the old, and find a way. Yeah. So why do I have a straightforward answer? No, I do not. I think it's kind of a journey, and I think Zero Trust, from my perspective, is kind of what gets us a little bit closer to that. And obviously, we need to have a look at all the other features, be it intrusion protection, be it from a network perspective, obviously application protection, and having firewalls. But you need some sort of a centralized way of doing it, because at some point it just becomes unmanageable, and you need to keep it and have a good visibility. So.
You bring up a number of topics there, and by the way, that wasn't meant to like tell me, get you to give me a full list of all your actions you're going to do. No, it's more to begin the conversation. You nailed three things I think that are fascinating there. So identity, the way in which we're handling data, and the drive to a cloud, enabling more and more of an attack surface. Now, Karl, I'll come to you, because I know that in Base you've done a lot in terms of driving adoption of cloud services. So how do you see that that adoption of cloud services, increasing your attack surface, decreasing it, and where does Zero Trust play into that from your point of view?
Yeah, so I think I agree with David's sentiment there, that the attack services are changing regularly and increasing. So for us, we've tried to really focus on what we know, and then try and focus even more on what we don't know. Because I think clearly that's where the overall threat is, and that don't know element for us, there's a fairly strong focus on third-party risk. So whether that be consumption of services, which it's easy for users in any organization to go out and buy something on company credit card, or subscribe to a particular service, or outsource something to another organization. How are we looking at that third-party risk? And I think what we've had some success at in terms of understanding is through that use of data, and the use of what we're doing with our direct to internet kind of access, and routing all traffic through Zscaler for us gives us that visibility and that insight, which combined with our SIEM tools and our SOC, we can start to then look at it and say, okay, we know we've got our approved list of applications and services. Where are these things coming from? What are they about? And then we go and have the conversation with the rest of the organization. And I think there's a big theme in a lot of this for me, which is around the people aspect. We all talk about the people, process, technology bit. The people element is right at the very center of all of that, because that in some ways is our biggest threat, whether that be awareness, whether it's training, whether it's assumptions that are made. So in everything that we do, we try to underpin with a real strong cultural and awareness type program to just to bring things to life.
It's interesting. You mentioned kind of doubling down what David said originally, which is about the visibility of these things, understanding the way in which this is growing into the digital space and then moving into cloud and so forth. But that visibility becomes bigger and bigger. I think it's fair to state that that's maybe perhaps the one part of most organizational transformation or shift is overlooked, is that visibility gives you the power to make the decisions. And I think that's also one part of Zero Trust that's overlooked as well, and visibility. Is that something you've enabled to really kind of get your hands around and take charge of?
Yeah, it is something that is an evolving picture. I mean, in technology teams, we're awash with data. We've got no shortage of things that we can collect. It's what we actually do with it. And I think that's the important part. So, we have a relatively small team for the services that we deliver and the scope that we've got. But there are people that are very focused on running through that data and really making use of it. And I think that that's an important point. I had a conversation this morning with another organization, and it's really about, look, we've got tons of data here. Where's the noise and where's the real kind of facts? Where's the stuff we really need to get into? The next stage will be, how do we all start to automate our responses to that, whether it's a particular incident or a threat, or it's an initiative that's happening. So, we're on that journey, and there are other organizations which are much more advanced. But we've done what we can at the moment to kind of understand that data, understand our threat landscape, and then respond to what we deal with, which is particularly important given the situation that we found ourselves in this time last year, where it's like, everybody pack up, you're going to be working from home for the foreseeable. Don't know how long that is. For us, luckily, we're in a good position that, we treated every worker, whether they were in an office or out of an office or in a different office, as if they were a remote worker. So we had the controls and processes in place to enable us just to keep going. But, you got to then factor in, you've got people working at home on whatever Wi-Fi you don't know, etc. So for us, again, visibility through that path is something we want to make more of, if nothing else, to help protect ourselves further, but also help with that employee experience. And you've heard me talk about that before, which is a real strong focus for us: employee experience and simplifying the entire desktop service for them.
That's interesting. And simplifying the desktop experience for end users is probably one of the biggest challenges we see, because people want to just have the simplest path to access an application. David, you have, as you mentioned a bit earlier, one of the largest distributions of the company, almost every country, every territory around the world. How does DHL drive that kind of user experience at the same time as obviously controlling and trying to protect your core assets?
I feel like I'm getting the tougher questions here.
Oh, no, come on.
I mean, to be honest, we need to have a look at, so there's obviously a standardization. We have a number of divisions. Sometimes there needs to be a tweak. So you have something on the end devices that kind of is as standardized as possible. I think the connectivity and stuff is a little bit more difficult, because it depends what infrastructure is really available in each part of the regions or countries more specifically. I'm definitely with Karl, what Karl mentioned is down to people and external parties connecting in. And right now we have half the employees connecting externally through equipment we don't know. And I think even we had a conversation earlier today, how do we say, even go further away from just an attack surface, how do we troubleshoot when people have issues? Because we suddenly have a significant remote workforce. We have currently 570,000 employees, out of which probably close to 150,000 working remote, give or take. So we get a lot more incidents and stuff replaced. And now, is it their Wi-Fi? Is it their home network? Is it something on the internet? Is it really something we can fix as part of the DHL group? And that kind of also then reflects on the attack surface and the security part. So there is no real easy kind of answer. We're looking at now what can we put onto the people's PC. So, and I think the user experience, I think Karl touched on beautifully, was how can we make it easy for them? Is there something we can just put a script or something with a button on the laptop and they push it and kind of gives them, oh, can you check this or this? It looks like maybe potentially here's an issue, or if not, please contact your help desk. Or it creates a file that it can send us something, so that we also have a better understanding, okay, which way are you being routed? We had at one stage an issue with remote workforce where it was going from Germany. It wasn't, we had an issue from Germany, but everywhere else it was working fine through the centralized points. And so it's kind of a changing environment in that. And again, no easy answer, I think. But yeah, we try to have at least as standardized as possible on the back end and have those processes in place. And I think that the rest of it kind of just needs to follow. See what's really important that you need to protect, and where the focus needs to go.
There's been
Sorry, I'll go for it.
There's been some interesting shifts over that last year. For us, we struggled to some degree while we're in an office environment to get people to log tickets and use the service desk and kind of go through that route, because we had a tech bar in the building, which meant, people would walk up and they would say, I've got a problem, and we'd take them through it. And that the tech bar has been, the focal point for all sorts of conversations. Now that's completely removed. So we've seen obviously the shift go completely the other way to much more kind of self-service type approaches, which for us was a bit of a struggle in terms of how are we going to really get people to drive through to that self-service angle. And we're seeing that increase. And we definitely don't want to lose that when we start to return back to not just one office, but for us, it's going to be multiple offices now. So how do we really balance that kind of, I need to see somebody, get them to look at it type approach with actually there's some more self-service you need to do. And again, for us, there are really some really strong conversations around what is that end-to-end employee experience. And as David said, particularly where, you know, at the moment we don't know whether that's, you know, their kids have come home and are on the Xbox and that meant they've had some degradation in service, or whether there's an issue in their street or whatever it may be. But for us, it's about just going that extra little bit further to see how close to diagnosing that can we get to enable them to have a conversation with their ISP or whoever it is they need to be.
That's a great point,
yeah.
Karl, because we actually almost had the opposite thing where people logged 1 or 2 tickets, and then from Germany they said, we're not logging any more tickets. You guys just sort it out and just come and talk to us, and we'll give you some information and see where it is. But yeah, I think the other changing thing in the environment, at least for us, has been significant over the last year, other than workforce being from home, is video. We've always had video kind of enabled on the internet, but it was never really used, except maybe some telepresence, specific meetings. But other than that, it wasn't heavily used. And since then, video is heavily used, which created its own challenges across the networks. And it opened up a whole new things that we didn't have before. So even though it was available, the demand wasn't there. But right now, we get a lot of video usage from our user base. So I'm not sure if you're seeing the same on your side, especially now that people haven't seen each other for 6 months or 4 months or a year.
Yeah,
definitely. I think we were in a situation where we were partway through our piloting of Teams. We had it to 500 users, going down the usual route of training and, you know, kind of hand-holding and getting through. And then, of course, 2 days later, everybody's working from home. So it's like, push a button, deploy it to 10,000 people, and, you know, off you go. And now, you know, again, it's kind of like when we return back to this, we're not calling it hybrid, you know, it's multi-location working. It's like, well, what's that dynamic going to be when you've got 5 people in a meeting room, you know, with a meeting VC kit connected to Teams, and 2 people in another building down the road on their laptop, and 3 people at home in different locations? You know, how are we going to get them to kind of work seamlessly across that, and everybody have, you know, the feeling that they're included in the conversation? It's those kind of more cultural nuancy bits, I think, that they're going to be the difficult shifts to get right.
And Karl, you mentioned something that David actually said before, and I wanted to actually talk. Actually, the joke was that David actually said something I was going to ask him about, which is a really simple question, like, what does he recommend to like help troubleshoot the situation? And he said a big button, just press the button that summarizes things and provides the insights, which I think is a fantastic point. And you just said, press a button, we enable the Teams for everybody. So it's that if I can, you know, paraphrase, we're looking for the simplest possible way to collect information, connect people without that kind of overburdening of technology. So, Karl, I'm actually going to go with David to you this one. In your mind, what do you think success in this digital world looks like? Where is it as simple as anyone, including my parents, can just connect and do work with DHL if they're allowed to, of course? I mean, they have to have the right identity, of course. But is it a matter of that, or is there trying to remove that friction so it is as simple as just touching a button and that end user experience is just simple?
I mean, from my perspective, it definitely would to make it as easy as possible. I think from the business perspective, I think what users are looking for is what we already have at home or have had for some time. You click, you shop, you do this, you do that, and it just kind of works. You don't jump through millions of hoops and policies and stuff, but it's still secure. So like talking with your banks, we've done that for a significant amount of time. So I think this is what and I think the enterprises, including DPDHL, we're moving more and more to the cloud. So having just internal network and on-prem hosted things, we'll have them and we'll have them for time to come, but the percentage shift is shifting. And I think the users, all they want to do is do their job and be able to click on what they need so that they can get their stuff done without having to deal with it. And it's similar for us at home, to be honest, right? If I have something at home, I just want to turn on the electricity. I don't want to have to analyze it and see where the issue is in the house or if it needs fixing. So it's the similar thing that the users just want to be able to get on with what they need to, so they don't waste their time with things that they don't need. And I guess being out of the office makes it a little bit more difficult for them, especially if they have like a beautiful bar that they can go to and discuss it locally. and we had a similar kind of setup, not a bar, but we had like a tech area where users could come in one of our locations or a couple of the locations. So it's a changing environment, and I think it will continue changing. I mean, Office 365 is one with Teams, but there is more and more of these kind of cloud type services, and I think yeah, and they are going to come off the network. Obviously, the other big question from my perspective then is, what do we do with the internal network if people will come back or not come back, and if they come back, if it will come back in a much smaller numbers than previously, which we don't have any trending on for the time being. But yeah, that's kind of as easy as possible, to be honest. Like as a user, you want to use it. You don't want to have to figure it out technically or set it up, or you just want to use it and get on with it.
And that's interesting because simplicity is always kind of the other end of the table from zero trust. When we have a conversation with people, like zero trust can be quite scary for them. So coming back to that idea of zero trust, and Karl, what are your thoughts on keeping, how do we become successful as an industry with zero trust as a mechanism to ensure that least privileged connectivity, at the same time as we've just heard from David about the simplicity, the end user experience should be like working from home. So how do we tie those two together so that we're providing the control with zero trust and we're able to provide the business success with connectivity? How do you see that from base?
So I think that as a challenge for me feeds into something on that simplicity, simplicity of what? And then we often talk about simplicity of user interface or an application. But if we step back and say, actually, let's look at the user journey and the service that we're delivering here. How do we make that full end-to-end service as simple as possible? Now, in some ways, the zero trust element and what we do around security can be quite complex for the technical people to get their head around and put in, but a user doesn't care about that. A user wants to open the lid on their device, connect and go, and that is it. So, within that for us, it's like, well, what's our approach to making that a seamless experience? So for us, the zero trust angle is, whether there's lots of debates about whether trust or not trust and, all that kind of stuff, which we can debate. But, for it's almost the flip of, you're being in the building and you're connected, therefore you can do what you like. It's how do we segment it down, make sure that those users that need access to particular applications are the only ones that have got access to those. How do we know where the data is going? If there is a particular issue, great, and we've got some control around it. It's thinking about it in a slightly different way. And for us, looking at that kind of user journey, end-to-end service, which I think is important. Otherwise, you kind of get too focused in on how do I make this application work really fast? Well, it could be doing A, B, and C, but so it's part of that overall service and that system that we try to look at. And it works with everything from two-factor authentication and what we do in that sort of space. Again, how do we make that seamless? What do we do around single sign-on? And that the whole concept of least privilege is what works for us. Don't assume because you work in the finance team that you should have unfettered access to the finance system. It's that kind of stuff. But lots of mapping of personas, users, figuring out their paths, kind of what it is that they need to do on their day-to-day journeys, and that changes. So it's an evolving picture in terms of that end-to-end service. But from the overall security angle, we've taken that approach, we've embedded it, and we've been using it for the last 3 years, and that's what really works for us.
Yeah. And I think the complexity, I think you're right. The complexity should be on the back end, not on the user side, because I think zero trust is complex. And as you said, it's evolving and will continue to evolve. There'll be continuous changes and stuff. And I think the segmentation of the population or what the access to is key. But I think from the user perspective, again, you just want to have it as simple as possible, open the lid and use, and hopefully you have access to what you need to use, and you just have a process in place in case that's not the case. But yeah, I agree with Karl. It's like, it's key, it needs to be done, but the complexity should really be hidden on the back end from the user itself.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, nobody has to explain HTTPS to anybody, or this is what we're doing with encrypting your emails, or data loss prevention. Although they just think that people just need to know I'm working with it. Somebody else is taking care of that for me, and it's the tech folk that do it. So it's, you know, that's part of our continuous improvement to make sure that we're keeping on top of that, and we're advancing, and we're assessing and saying what's appropriate for our organization, you know, context at this particular moment in time, and what's going to be next. That's all we can do, really.
It's interesting because you both called out, I guess, some the targets of what this would be, but by all means, it's worthwhile considering also who the main beneficiaries of these sort of actions. So, like, who's going to be benefiting from these activities? Obviously, the security, because we've made the place more secure. But from both of you, what do you see as the areas of the business that benefit the most from this kind of simple but secure, zero trust enabled access to applications? Who wants to go first? Or I'm going to pick on one of you.
I'm happy to go first. I wouldn't call it simple. Definitely nothing simple about it, at least not from our perspective. So I think security obviously is number one, the beneficiary there. I think what it drives, though, is a much better understanding within our group as to what connects to where and why. And potentially because everything was open internally before. And the other advantage is a bit better control of externals that connect in to our applications, be it the support companies, vendors, contractors as well. But I think it's more the visibility and understanding, because when you segment it, it becomes that it either works or it doesn't work, and you need to work through the segmentation in the first place, but then you need to kind of work out, you will understand where it goes. So then you can also optimize the network in itself because you understand the flows. And that's not always understood. It's not that the lack of it. We monitor stuff, but at a certain point, you don't get to every single applications and the thousands of applications and see. And I think once you do the zero trust, that visibility increases, and that I think it's definitely adds some value there. And understanding.
I see you nodding there, Karl. Is that agreement? Or you have any other beneficiaries that you see?
No, I mean, I'll wholeheartedly agree with all of those. I think the only thing to add really is there's a financial aspect as well. So understanding exactly what is being consumed and through where enables us then to step back and say, how do we then fold that back into our product strategy? So if we can see there being similar applications being consumed, which are on our unknown list, and we're building a case management system for argument's sake, and we can see 3 other examples, well, that's a conversation to have with the business units to say, look, we're building this, give us your requirements, or we're going to take a look for ourselves and see what we can do together. So, and again, that for us is part of our rationalization and our simplification, because we need to enable in a fairly fluid environment in terms of the work that we've got to deliver, is how do you easily move people around the organization and then still retain both that corporate knowledge, but have that familiarity with user interface and applications and services, which I think helps. It's a small part, but it's kind of part of our efficiency angle, because learning new systems, we've talked about the simple side of things and people at work wanting the same as they've got at home. But there does always seem to be this kind of, I turn up to work and I expect something slightly different. And if you, in the old days, before COVID, say the old days, only a year or so ago, isn't it? But it used to be an insistence that we had some form of training. There would be some official classroom that we would go to and we would sit and learn. And my challenge back to my team would be, well, who taught them to use Facebook? Who taught them to use Twitter? Is that kind of just natural, would get on and do it. Yet when it comes to enterprise applications, there's a bit of a, hang on a minute, I need to learn how to do that. And that might be it probably is from a good place in terms of, I don't want to break anything, I don't want to lose anything, etc. So how do we just kind of make more of that? Just make people easier for them to just experiment, use stuff, get on with it and see what works.
It's interesting. You bring up a topic. I was talking with my parents over the weekend, and they're obviously coming from a different generation, and they're worried about touching something and it breaking, or doing something that would be bad. And I think they've come to there's an education of especially within the corporate enterprise, it kind of replicates that. Don't touch anything because you might break it. Whereas I think our generation and younger than us is let's just touch everything and figure out what happens and then fix it if it breaks. And it's kind of that exploratory mindset that, to your point, kind of helps out with the Facebook and the Twitter and things, because there's only so much you can do within that. So making it as easy for anyone to pick up and click anything and then figure out what they've done is probably key. But at the same time, obviously not giving them access to everything.
Go
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, and there's a bit in that kind of multi-generational workforce that, you know, for me personally, I feel we need to start thinking more about, you know, the future generations that are coming into the workplace, and what's the impact of that going to be. So, you know, I see my 15-year-old daughter rarely types anything into her phone. It's either dictated or it's a voice memo and it's sent. So how's that going to start translating into the workforce in 10 years' time? Are we going to see less document-based things and more voice-related? If so, what does that actually mean for storage? What does it mean for analytics? What does it mean for making sense of all that? So, you know, I think there's a whole heap of things to look at on the horizon, which are going to soon be with us. But we need to get some building blocks in place to make sense of it all. That for me is quite an interesting challenge.
Actually, I like that. And I think we even kind of internally once or twice bounced around this, that you kind of need that in place to attract the young talent, because otherwise they kind of they come in and says, what is that? Are you serious? This is what you would give me if I come here? So it's kind of, the expectation of the younger generation is also completely different to, so I fully agree with the multi-generational thing. You need to make it workable with all generations, but I think to attract the younger talent and attract younger people in general, it needs to be a slightly different approach, and it needs to be a bit more flexible. And I think the old ways don't necessarily just work.
Yeah, and particularly I think, you know, in kind of the sort of work people want to do. And I spoke to some students at a university that I'm involved with a while back. And, you know, what struck me there was, you know, people that were less interested in a career for life, which might have been a few generations ago. But, you know, the sentiment was almost like, I want to do interesting work with interesting people. And if that lasts 3 months or it lasts 3 years, I don't really mind. So there's something about that, you know, people coming into the workforce. How are you handling that dynamic, and how are you making sure that you're retaining the right records and the knowledge and everything else that goes along with it? It's almost like a gig economy, but, you know, in that kind of corporate world. How do we handle that, and how do we secure that, and how do we, you know, let people transition and move around?
And actually, I also found that they like learning by doing, and I think you kind of mentioned that with the classroom versus not classroom. And I think people don't necessarily from a classroom retain that much until they really use it and until they really get into all the use cases. So I think learning by doing, generally they get the experience much faster. And if we allow them to make mistakes and do it that way, then they will learn much more than doing any classroom training, which is actually quite costly, right, overall. And you need to get people in the same places, or virtually now it takes a lot of effort, and not always as effective as and again.
So gents, we're getting close to the top of our time, and we could keep talking about this forever, but I think there's one thing, as the two of you are very close to the coalface when it comes to the zero trust deployments, not only within your organizations, but the industry at large. I think it's probably best to leverage the knowledge coming from you and let you be the last ones to speak for today about this. But if you can offer any pearls of wisdom, advice for those watching now, those listening to this conversation, what would you recommend to the people listening to ensure they're following a successful path towards zero trust? I'll let either of you pick to go first.
Look, for me, is learn from others. Network and connect with those that have kind of been there and done it, and try and understand how you can apply that to the context of your own organization. You know, the technical aspects we can get our head around, and we can lean on others, but you know, I think for me it's you know, it's get as much awareness and understanding from people that have been there and done it as possible. Which is you, and is there any particular thing you can recommend starting with? Is there an area that you can recommend from the base experience? Well, as the expert, of course. I'm not avoiding the question, but, you know, start. You know, the Simon Sinek quote of dream big, start small, but most of all start. You know, I think there can be a hesitance to it, and where you've got, particularly where in our organization and others I've worked in, there's been a degree of separation from the CISO type role from the core technology team, and it sits elsewhere. So the number one thing is bring together those interested parties from the beginning to have that discussion. And again, if we look at some of the measurement frameworks and metrics that we have around scoring our health of security, they're sometimes based on the old castle and moat type approach, which when you then come and say, I've got a different way of doing it, you spend a lot of time trying to re-educate people into there is a different way. Right. So for me, it's bring together, you know, the CISO, the IT director, whoever it may be, get them in and agree that this is the right thing to do. And if not, have the conversation and understand why it's not, and keep challenging. So hopefully that some kind of answer.
That's awesome. No, thank you, Karl. And David, last words from you.
Well, Karl took all the good ones, but I think what's also important is having a clear scope, knowing what your outcome is. What is it you're trying to achieve? Because sometimes you just go zero trust and I want to put it in. Well, why are you putting it in? What is it you're trying to achieve with it, right? So I think that needs to be very clear from the beginning, because I think we can overcomplicate it. Then I agree fully with Karl. Take steps. I mean, it doesn't need to be perfection at first, but start somewhere, because it's a large elephant and it's not simple. So learning from others, I think. And then getting people on board, because to be honest, we can't just do it from a network perspective. We can't just do it from the InfoSec perspective. You really need everyone kind of involved and on board, because it's a lot of applications, it's a lot of different departments and divisions, and it will not work unless you kind of have them on board and everyone's kind of working towards the common goal. So yeah, that would be the way we're looking at it.
So I think it's a very good summary of get it started, but do it within a scope that you can control, and make sure you have the right buy-in from the right people. Make sure when you do get it started, it's a ball that rolls and doesn't stop. So that's I think wonderful advice and a perfect way to end this conversation. So thank you all for being here and listening to the great insights from Karl and from David. Clearly, if you have any further follow-up questions, please place them in the Q&A box below. We'll certainly be happy to answer them to you. So I'd like to thank you, everybody, for your time today. I'm going to pass it over now to Peter Smith, and I wish you all a lovely afternoon. Thank you. Peter, over to you.